Chuanshu plus farming plus counterattack plus system plus female strong, have you been abused? Live streaming, if a woman can't be a big brother, she can be a big brother herself. Please take a look at how a steel straight woman, who is loyal to her country, struggles to survive in the world of the jungle. Keywords of the novel. Interstellar Live. Chuanshu Beast World brings goods to survive without pop-ups, Interstellar Live. Chuanshu Beast World brings goods to survive complete collection download TXT, Interstellar Live. Chuanshu Beast World brings goods to survive latest chapter reading. Chapter 1. Loyalty Welfare. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1 Loyalty Welfare. I really can't escape this time. Deep in the mountains and forests of Myanmar, beneath a dark altar resembling an ancient castle, Lin Gua threw down her empty gun with no bullets and checked her few remaining equipment and supplies. There were 2 gunshot wounds, 4 knife wounds, and blood flowing everywhere. She grabbed the only roll of gauze and didn't know where to cover it. Listening to the occasional gunshots and startled bird calls from the distant mountains and forests outside, she simply stuffed gauze into the wound on her chest. Feeling her body temperature decreasing, she felt grateful that she had already sent back the information that the country needed the most. Satisfied, he pulled out a book made of animal skin that was sitting at the foot of the table next to him. In order to alleviate the pain, he happily read it. Tsk Tisk, it's actually the ancient Chinese script of the 5 husbands. The scale is so big, is this what my great daughter should see? Originally, excessive blood loss and pain had made Lin Gua's consciousness somewhat blurred, but upon seeing this content, he suddenly became more energetic. His eyes widened a lot, and he looked at it with a faint light coming in through the cracks in the wall. That's right. It's truly an ancient early text, it's just stimulating. It starts off with ambiguous content, and the viewers are passionate and angry. 1-man snake orc, 2-man bear orc, 3-man tiger orc, especially in the later stage, the chapter has meat. I can't sleep, I can't faint, I can still endure. Lin Gua, whose mind was becoming increasingly drowsy, bit his lips and ordered himself to hold on, at least finishing the key part of the gathering of 5 men in the room. She may never have the chance to see such a wonderful article again in her life. Please, for the sake of her loyalty to the country, fulfill her last small request. Unfortunately, the heavens were too busy, and in the end, Lin Gua's consciousness blurred and his pupils dilated. He still persisted in using 2 fingers, and his palm, which was almost shattered by a shotgun, worked hard to turn the page. Almost ah. Lin Guameng took a deep breath and sat up, as if drowning for a century, desperately breathing in the rare air. Until she took a breath, her palm unconsciously pulled as if flipping through a book page, and her mouth murmured, "I'm Chow, what a pity, I haven't finished reading the key parts." He hammered his head with hatred, blaming it for not being competitive. It can't wait any longer for it to cool down, it's just so close. Wait, is this arm tied with a sandbag? So heavy. Or was she rescued and now in a kidnapped state? Lin Gua is definitely not the kind of person who disregards everything as soon as she realizes something is wrong. She immediately put aside the content of the article and checked her own status. I saw her in a pitch-black tent, with a damp and moldy smell filling her nose. There was also a mixture of flesh and blood rotting and a foul smell of sweat, a mixture of flavors that made her sensitive nose unable to resist sneezing. Her professional ethics made her resist this instinct and reached out to touch her whole body. Except for the real and tangible fat, she didn't find any wounds. How long has she been unconscious? Are the injuries all good, and have you gained so much weight? Lin Guo was confused and jumped up to hide at the entrance of the tent, ready to open the animal skin door curtain to peek outside. I didn't expect to be dragged down by a body full of fat, my arms didn't support my body, and I stumbled and hit the ground at the door with a plop. I'm Chow. This is Lin Gua's second time using vulgar language. It's not that he likes to use foul language, I can't help it. This body is soft and weak, big and heavy, just like a fat pig that has been filled with an expanding agent. Quickly, the sound of jogging came from outside the tent, and the hurried footsteps came to a sudden halt at the entrance of the tent. Then, a nervous little boy's voice came into his ears. "Lingua, what's wrong with you? Did you fall? Did you ask me for something? Are you hungry again?" Listening to the sound of friends rather than enemies, Lingua was really curious about her current position and what had happened to make her change so much. Seeing someone show goodwill towards her, she immediately lifted the door curtain and rolled out of the small tent door. Yes, it's using rolling. She is too fat, squatting or bending down are both high difficulty movements, and it is more convenient to go straight out without stopping. Despite being bulky, she accidentally stepped onto a thin pillar supporting the entrance of the tent, and the tent immediately collapsed in one corner. The atmosphere is a bit awkward. Lingua brushed away the messy hair that blocked her eyes, coughed lightly twice, but her eyes secretly looked around. As the sun set, the only remaining light made it difficult for her to see far, and she could barely see a huge fire and shadows of people walking on a distant open ground outside the simple wall made of sparse branches. In the distance, there were black shadows of towering mountains and forests, endless and continuous. Occasionally, a few wild animal roars and bird songs could be heard faintly, causing fear. Without knowing the situation, speak less and observe more. Lingua quickly withdrew his gaze and focused on the thin little boy in front of him. The boy only had a piece of animal skin wrapped around his waist, blocking the key areas. There was no further covering from top to bottom, and his small arms and legs were bone-thin and rugged. On the exposed skin, covered in dry and cracked mud, my little hands kept picking at the crack in the mud, which made me itch and the mud started to fall down. The boy, who was too thin, appeared to have a big head. His small face was thin, with particularly prominent big eyes. At this moment, he was nervously staring at Lingua's face, his small mouth constantly closing, as if he wanted to say something but was afraid of her getting angry. With a cautious appearance, it's like a pitiful little dog. Lingua analyzed the environment and didn't seem to have any worries about life for the time being. He breathed a faint sigh of relief and looked at the figures in the distance, nudging his mouth and asking, "Children, what are they all doing? Aren't they sleeping so late?" Looking at her living tent, which was still made of animal skin, Lingua guessed that she had been saved by someone or sold to become a wife in the deep mountains and forests, otherwise she wouldn't be able to explain everything in front of her. Unexpectedly, the little boy stumbled and said a few words, almost startling her chin. The little boy unconsciously grabbed the corner of his animal skin apron with one small hand, lowered his eyes, and timidly said to her, "So, that's Wu Mei teaching everyone to speak Mandarin. Are you going, Lingua?" "No, Lingua, how can you speak Mandarin? You haven't even left the tent before." The child was still muttering, and Lingua had already struck his head like lightning, making a loud noise. She is familiar with this story. Not long after she started writing, the witch she was wearing was picked up by an uncivilized orc tribe, who said she was inspired by beast gods and promoted the Mandarin of flower growers. Is this the live version of the book that Wu Meiwu came to, where she died without closing her eyes? Alright. Open a new article, feel free to ask. I hope you can provide valuable feedback and bow. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Meaning of Life. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2 Meaning of Life. Lingua found it easy to accept the fact that her soul was worn out. After all, when her parents passed away when she was a child, in order to avoid looking at her uncle and aunt's faces, she was admitted to the military academy at a young age. Loyalty to the king and serving the country was her greatest wish. The wish has been fulfilled, and she has wasted another life. Even if an animal is regenerated, she has no complaints. Most people don't have the opportunity to do so yet. She just really wants to see what the female lead Gu Zhaowen looks like now, and whether she is as beautiful as a flower and jade as a celestial being. Otherwise, how could the 5 proud and charming male protagonists with vastly different personalities be so determined to go through fire and water for her? Is it because she carries a famous weapon? At this moment, the child in front of Lin Guo remembered with the help of his trained strong memory. The child in the book doesn't have much presence, but instead has an ugly, fat, lazy, and annoying female supporting character, which is easy to leave a deep impression on people. Living on the outskirts of the tribe, he led an unhappy younger brother to beg for the survival of 100 families in the tribe. He ate every meal but never finished, especially the older sister who snatched his brother's food and couldn't walk away, starving him into a carrot head. Isn't that sister who has a lot of negative words just herself? Lin Guo raised his hand and indeed saw that his hand was covered in burned scars. He then raised his hand and touched the burned growth on his forehead, and suddenly sat down in the seat with a clear understanding. As soon as he saw his sister's movements, his younger brother Lin Bao's eyes immediately turned red. He choked up and cried softly, "I'm sorry, Lin Guo. If it weren't for me." "Stop it, it's none of your business. If anyone were in the fire, I would save them." Lin Guo looked at his dirty little face, which was immediately flushed out of 2 mud grooves with tears. He turned his head in disgust and waved his hand to prevent the child from continuing to cry with guilt. I sighed inwardly, just because a tent caught fire and I burned myself like this, my original body also didn't understand some firefighting knowledge. Another thing to say, as a person who wanders on the brink of life and death all year round, she has no concept of appearance at all. Living is good. If you can't find a man, then live as a man. The child thought that his sister didn't want him to bring up this matter. With a tear in his eyes, he turned around and his swaying little body ran towards the fire. As he ran, he said, "Lin Guo, wait for me to give you something to eat." Before Lin Guo could make a sound of obstruction, the child ran away in a flash, leaving her with no time to say anything later. Seeing this, she could only wait for him to come back and ask other questions. Lin Guohun walked over, knowing that this was the world of a book, and had no memory of his original self. He also had little knowledge of the local customs and traditions. Who made this ancient early prose almost entirely flesh, and all other content was filled with sadistic love, laying the groundwork for the great collaboration between male and female protagonists. With 2 eyes smeared, she planned to wait for 2 days to see what was going on. Originally, the edges were small and transparent, and as long as she was honest, no one would notice her. Later on, it proved how naive her thoughts were. In this world of the jungle, she couldn't survive without provoking others. The sound of mosquitoes began to sound in Lin Guo's ear, and he slapped himself in the face with a loud and polite voice. The sky is almost completely dark. If you don't look at the eye dot catching fire in the distance, you can hardly see anything around you, and you can't even see stars or the moon in the sky. It's pitch black as if your eyes are blocked. If it weren't for the refreshing scent of soil and plants lingering in her breath, she would have doubted whether this was a completely opaque secret room. What a magical celestial phenomenon, the world in the book is unique. After observing the sky and earth for a long time, the hunger in her stomach reminded her of the urgent need for food, possibly due to obesity, and her ability to control hunger decreased significantly. After killing the 53rd mosquito, she finally couldn't help but stand up and walk towards the fire, not only to see what the child had done but also to avoid the rampant mosquitoes in the darkness. If she didn't find a way, she felt like she was going to be eaten by mosquitoes. 2 pieces of animal skin cover the privacy of the whole body, and every inch of the skin on the other parts feels like mosquitoes are searching for the position of the lower mouth, which is both painful and itchy. Stepping into the flames, she could see from afar that the child was pitifully staring at a woman eating grilled meat. The woman was dressed in a beautiful lace dress, which was different from everyone else's, and she looked like the original female lead of the book. A fair and delicate face, sitting on a stone covered in animal skin next to the fire, was being advised to eat more meat by a man with narrow eyes and a somewhat gloomy appearance. The woman was clearly a bit afraid of the man, pursing her lips and avoiding a piece of meat that was delivered to her mouth. She whispered, "I'm really full, I don't want it anymore." The sweet and greasy little voice sounded like Lin Guo's desire for protection was overwhelming, even though he was really full and wanted to tease for a while longer. The shy little appearance and sweet little voice Lin Guo shivered in the cold night breeze. My gaze turned to the child who still had a pleading gaze, staring at the piece of meat in the man's hand. Perhaps it was because the child's gaze was too intense, and the man's gaze couldn't bear to tear off the delicate beauty, giving the child a disdainful glance. The child saw that the two of them finally noticed him, and immediately grinned at him with a pleasing smile. His small face, covered in mud, cracked open and fell straight down. His hands were like a pug, clasped together and arched at him in an inappropriate manner. The man frowned and threw the thin piece of meat on his fingertips at him. The boy jumped up and grabbed the piece of meat with both hands, as if afraid of getting dirty. He then grabbed a leaf next to the fire, placed it on his hand, and carefully placed the meat on the leaf, holding it in both hands. He then continued to squat back in his original position, pleasing the two of them with a smile. Lin Guo widened his eyes and looked at the small person next to the fire, whose face had been burnt out by the fire. The longing for food in his eyes deeply hurt her heart. She was originally preparing for the game book, but suddenly felt that it was also a world of flesh and blood, a world where someone wanted to take care of her. Even if she was so hungry that she swallowed her saliva, she wanted to beg for an extra bite for her. Her gaze no longer fell on the affectionate male and female protagonists, no matter what kind of flesh they were. In her eyes, she only saw her younger brother, who was originally a blood relative, the small little figure, anxiously surrounding them like a begging monkey. As he watched the woman refuse to eat, he instinctively opened his small mouth, as if eager to catch her. In a faint moment, sparkling saliva flowed from the corner of his mouth. I don't know if it's because of the emotions in her original body, but Lin Guo couldn't help but tug at the corner of her mouth when she saw him pitifully. Tears couldn't help but burn down, burning her cold and hard heart as if it had been burned. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Live Broadcasting System. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3 Live Broadcasting System. Two adults were pushing back and forth, ignoring the appearance of the children around them crying and making Lin Guo completely unable to bear it. Strolling over, he picked up the child and held it in his arms. The heavy footsteps attracted all the men and women of the beast race whispering to each other by the fire. No one took the initiative to pay attention to these strange siblings, and some even covered their small grilled meat or unknown food with their bodies when they passed by, as if afraid that they would lose a piece if they saw them. There was also a young orc woman who almost shouted loudly with the surname Dao, "Some people not only have ugly hearts but also ugly hearts. They lie at home all day and let their little ones come out to pretend to be pitiful and look for food. They are simply not worthy of living in this world." If the original owner had heard these comments about her, he would have become even more insecure and irritable. Lin Guo had a strong and fearless heart, and turned around to scan the crowd who were all staring at her. Her cold gaze was infused with a cold and righteous aura, making people ignore her appearance. All attention was focused on those eyes. For some reason, the noisy crowd, including the restless cubs, suddenly fell silent. The big fire was making a crackling sound. Slightly leaning, everyone immediately became angry and embarrassed when they realized it. Surprisingly, they were intimidated by the eyes of a lazy and ugly monster, especially a few middle-aged orcs from the hunting team, who were preparing to wait for them to come over and beg for food to humiliate her. Unexpectedly, Lin Guo gave them a faint glance, just like looking at a piece of wood. He turned around and carried the child away, making their breath so steady that they couldn't lift it up. His already negative impression of Lin Guo was even more overwhelming. Lin Guo said that a group of uncivilized orcs love to say whatever they want, and she is too lazy to listen. However, the child she is holding in her arms is struggling incessantly, and she still remembers to shout back. Lingua is not ugly, it's me who is willing to take care of her. Lingua, you let me go down and I'll have this little bit of meat. How can you eat enough? You haven't eaten for a day, I'll work hard again. Wu Mei eats less, it's best to take it. She had almost no experience with children, and Lingua didn't know how to coax them. Seeing him struggling fiercely, his small body was thin and bony, and he was quite energetic. As soon as she lifted her arm, she directly grabbed the child under her armpit. Even if the plump arms were not strong enough, they could not be shaken by a child who had not eaten, so Lin Bao was suppressed. His murmuring mouth was also blocked by the piece of meat that Lingua had bought. The world is quiet now. Just leaving the fire and walking back is equivalent to walking into darkness. Lingua said that at the current level of brightness, she is very likely to lose these few steps. Just now, as she approached the fire, her eyes were illuminated by the bright flames for half a day. Suddenly, she looked at the darkness again and said, "Blind." Fortunately, she had a good sense of direction. Which direction was coming from? She closed her eyes and touched back to the familiar odor tent. Without hesitation, she took off the child's shy animal skin and waved it around the tent opening, driving away a dense swarm of mosquitoes. Until he felt that there were fewer mosquitoes, Lingua lifted a small corner of the tent and stuffed the child inside, and he also struggled to get in. Suddenly, various unpleasant and sultry smells filled the nose. In the airtight animal skin tent, the damp and stuffy heat, along with a few annoying mosquitoes, lingered in my ears. From time to time, mosquito bites and stings all over his body, as well as the animal skin tent hanging and itching from the spot where he accidentally kicked and collapsed, made it difficult for Lingua to fall asleep despite his hungry stomach tossing and turning. Lying on the itchy animal skin mat, I heard the child's murmurs gradually decrease and fall into sleep. Lingua grabbed the shy animal skin and fanned the two of them away mosquitoes. His mind was filled with memories of her comrades fighting side by side. The kind leaders. The voices and faces of her parents that were almost indistinct in the depths of his memory, and even the uncles and aunts who despised her for not being easy to serve but didn't have any less use for her. Farewell to my dear motherland, goodbye to my family and friends, goodbye to my mobile anime. Didi, host call detected, may I ask if Interstellar live streaming is enabled? Lingua, whose slightly sore hand suddenly snapped, and he snapped out of his dazed memories. He vigilantly opened his eyes wide in the darkness, trying to find the thing and location that made the sound. Then the mechanical sound repeated without any change. Didi detected the host's call, do you want to start Interstellar live streaming? Under complete concentration, Lingua heard that the sound was entirely coming from his own head. Did someone implant a chip system into his brain? Her original world didn't have such advanced technology, as this animal world surpassed the future century completely. I won't move if the enemy doesn't move, and Lingua won't answer this so-called live broadcast. She just lay quietly waiting for the next content, until an inexplicable drowsiness surged up and she fell into a deep sleep. The default dark live broadcast room is quietly open without any sound. But looking at the status of the live broadcast, it's not that the screen has been turned off, but that a little light has passed through some kind of obstruction, giving the screen a little light. Jiao Yang. Is this a new anchor? For a long time, a row of words quietly drifted by on the dark screen. Huang Tianbeta said, what is it being broadcasted? It's so dark. After a while, another barrage passed by. Fairness and ease in people's hearts. It's really nonsense. Everything can be used for live streaming. If you report it, the network administrator doesn't care about these unhealthy practices. The font on the bullet screen is highlighted in orange, indicating that the report was truly impolite. But this report is invalid because although the screen is black, there is no prohibited content being played, and even if someone watches the mosaic, they don't care. After the darkest 2 hours outside the tent, a large and round moon rose to the sky, and the earth was covered with the essence of moonlight. The dark sky only had this round moon, like a huge eye, staring at the sleeping land. Until the various strange-shaped tents around were not very clear, and joyful sounds rose and fell up and down. On the pitch-black screen in Lingua's mind where live streaming is enabled by default, suddenly there is another bullet screen. Huang Tianbeta said, "Is this voice not right? Is the anchor brushing aside? Jiao Yang. You can't see the picture, only the sound. It enriches your imagination in just one go. It seems like there are still many people around. Where is so open? Curiosity." Sure enough, when encountering such a topic, people from all over the world have always joined in and become excited. Justice and freedom in people's hearts. If the Interstellar Network management does not act, it will be ignored. Report and report. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Unfortunate Departure. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4 Unfortunate Departure. Perhaps it was her first live broadcast, and Lingua's mental exhaustion was too great, causing her to fall into a coma and only wake up around noon the next day. When I woke up, I saw that the little one beside me had disappeared without a trace. Knowing that they could live for a long time without worrying, I immediately touched my swollen and red head, which had been bitten by mosquitoes, in order to search for the presence of chips under my skin. Last night, she remembered clearly that someone was talking about Interstellar live streaming in her mind. As an undercover veteran, she expressed that she didn't like to be exposed in front of people. But after searching for a while, she found nothing on her scalp, ears, and neck except for her sticky and greasy hair. Knowing that last night's voice was not an illusion, Lingua thought of becoming a monk and hitting the clock for a day. If he could catch the horse's foot sooner or later, he would no longer dwell on it. After all, his stomach is rebelling now, so no matter what, it won't work. She rolled out of the tattered tent the way she did yesterday, and the sunlight outside was bright, causing her to feel dizzy and dizzy. After adapting for a while, she finally set up a greenhouse on her forehead and looked at the environment she was in. At this moment, in the vast and open valley, except for some toddlers who were just learning to walk and elderly orcs who were almost unstable, there were hardly any middle-aged laborers in the camp. Except for the central square, there are messy animal skin tents everywhere. The tents closer to the center are more luxurious and exquisite, and she is located at the foot of the canyon near the edge. If there is any falling rock on the mountain, the first one to hit is her home. Perhaps it was too clever, as the tents around her clearly kept a distance from her home. Suddenly, after watching the entire valley, she had several subtitles added to her mind. Jiao Yang. Me asterisk asterisk asterisk, this is too ugly. Passerby I understand the blocked words upstairs. To be honest, this is the ugliest anchor I have ever seen. No, it's not just ugly, it's your fault to come out and scare people. Scar and mangy head, fat and bloated body, dirty hair and simple clothes, so poor. If you are kidnapped and sold to a mountain ditch, anchor, just blink your eyes and I'll report you to the internet police. Is that all you want? Even kidnapping has to be smashed in your hands. The kidnappers are crying fairness and ease in people's hearts. Pretending to be ugly and seeking favor from the public is too disgusting. This kind of person should not live stream. Let's report it and clean up the internet. Xiao Hua. Only I think the anchor is a bit pitiful. Look at where she lives, my Hubeo is even more exquisite than this. She's lazy, isn't she? The tent is surrounded by grass, so no matter how much she moves, she won't live like this. These bullet comments drifted through Lingua's head, like watching a video at home, warm and nostalgic, just that the protagonist they said was not themselves. Recalling last night's prompt, Lingua frowned and murmured again based on years of experience browsing the internet, my phone. Hey, I'm here. This voice is much more friendly than yesterday's electronic sound, it seems like an artificial little sister. What are you, why are you in my head? Sweet and beautiful voice immediately answered warmly, host 77778, hello. This is the StarCraft Live platform, and I am newcomer assistant Xiaomei. I will provide you with 7 days of free guidance on using the live streaming system. If you do not pay for it in the future, you can only use the electronic basic version. As for why it's in your mind, it's because the interstellar brain randomly selects hosts from various planes to start live streaming, making it convenient to enrich the interstellar spiritual life. What harm does this system pose to me? Lingua asked in confusion, trying to concentrate and not open her mouth, using her inner thoughts to ask Xiaomei about the system. Sure enough, her experiment was correct, and Xiaomei still answered clearly, no dear, the system is just a medium for auxiliary recording and opening up business, facilitating material and cultural exchanges among various interstellar systems. It has no impact on the host itself. Can you still trade materials with various stars? Lingua was happy first and then worried. She looked at the open canyon around her, and then at her impoverished self. What does she sell? No one wants to sell themselves. Are these barrage comments the audience of my live broadcast? Yes, as a newcomer to your first live broadcast, your live room is quite lively. After taking a look at the comments of Lingua who despised his influence on the city's appearance, Lingua twitched his lips, feeling that she didn't want this kind of heat. Turn off the live broadcast, Lingua ordered. A good host. Xiaomei is a manual customer service representative, but she completes her orders without any delay, making it difficult for her to ask questions about how to remove the system. In a world of anxiety, she left behind a live streaming system, really wanting to chat with netizens and make her feel that she has not left her original society. Perhaps she has more exposure to the technologically advanced interstellar world, and may even return to her homeland. With such a beautiful wish in mind, Lingua withdrew his empty thoughts and strode out of the canyon under the surprised gaze of a group of elderly, weak, women, and children orcs. The canyon entrance is a narrow mountain passage, with the narrowest point being a gap blocked by a large stone, effectively reducing the invasion of foreign organisms. Also, effectively stopped her body. Don't hunting teams usually leave from here? Or was it because the tribe targeted her and didn't even consider her as a chubby person when building this level? Her fat has been stuck all over her body. How should the large animals being hunted be brought in? Only reading a book reveals a few important events, and these subtle details are not described at all, which leads to Lingua's confident first time out of the valley being at a disadvantage and stuck in a dilemma. Underestimating the size of this body. She struggled for a while and sighed inwardly. Ha ha ha, what a fat hulking beast. It's stuck. We can pick it up and eat it for several days. A mocking boy's voice came from outside the valley. Another little girl's voice also chuckled and said, Xiong Zhuang, you can't say that. You should call her pig beast hee like in the Wumei religion. She shouldn't go through the valley mouth, she should go from the hanging tower and have the hunting team hang her out ha. Another little boy's voice sounded. The voices of a group of gossiping children kept arguing, causing a headache in the crevices of the canyon. When Lingua was caught and embarrassed by these children, he was grateful that he had turned off the live broadcast, otherwise it would have been a large-scale social death scene. She tried her best to break her body out again, finally earning more than half of it. Just as she could turn her head to look at the group of little cubs, she saw her big-headed younger brother, biting his teeth like a little leopard, with tears in her eyes, fiercely charging towards the leader Xiong Zhuang. A few fruits in my arms scattered all over the ground, and as I bumped, I sobbed and shouted, "Don't say that Lingua is ugly. She's all trying to save me." End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Great Transformation of Living Beasts. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The source has no content or has errors. Chapter 6. Immortal Soul. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Immortal soul lingua dare not disturb the female lead's peach blossom. As the cannon fodder for the female N, she knew that the female lead and the six of them could have a deep love affair no matter how much they abused each other. If they couldn't sleep once, it would be fine. If they couldn't sleep a few more times, it would be fine. But the people around her were in dire straits. She remembered that the original owner ended up being tied up on the river, fed piranhas, and finally left a breath to make a reproductive machine for the tribe. It could be as tragic as it could be, so she could only watch from a distance and never approach. What's scary? What's scary? She was still quietly with her child and hadn't gone far when suddenly a low voice of questioning came from behind. Stop. What are you two doing? Sneaking around in this river area, are you thinking of some bad idea to harm the tribe? Suffering from delusional delusions, right? Lin Guo rolled his eyes to the sky and continued to walk forward with his younger brother, not wanting to talk to these two people. But she ignored others and was rushed to provoke her. She only heard a faint running sound approaching from behind, and then her numb and itchy arm, bitten by mosquitoes on her left side, was suddenly grabbed by a warm little hand. A soft and gentle voice sounded from her side. Where are you going, Lin Guo? Take me with you. You're so cute, you must not be willing to refuse me, right? The girl looked like she was trying to coax a fool, and Lin Guo felt goosebumps all over her body. Especially when she tried to shake her arm without shaking it, Lin Guo was embarrassed and had cancer. The man behind her, with his increasingly angry breathing and the feeling of Wu Mei grabbing her arm more and more tightly, doesn't she still understand that this is the stage where the female protagonist and the green python are still in, you hide and I chase, you hide and I search, but if the two of you play with each other, don't pull your sister as a shield, okay? No, 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 Lin Guoqiu refused 3 times. Wu Mei didn't expect that this ugly indigenous person, who was so insecure and autistic, would be so difficult to talk about. Fortunately, she even praised her cuteness, holding up her hands that had been thrown away, and her aggrieved eyes turned red. What do you mean? The green python saw that his beloved had been wronged. Ignoring his previous thought that the farther Lin Guo rolled, the better, he stepped forward and reached out to slap Lin Guo's back of the head. It is normal for a tribe to resort to violence at the slightest disagreement, but there are very few who resort to picking and pulling females, indicating that the green python is either not a male beast or does not treat the forest fruit as a female. Chow, let's just forget about a few little brats. Do you, an old master, also want to take advantage of your hands and feet? Lin Guo had eyes on the back of his head, and his head tilted sharply, narrowly avoiding the palm wind. The green python looked down at the dirty back of its head from behind, and unbelieving the evil, it turned back and slapped Lin Guo's ear. Without hitting it, he couldn't swallow this breath. It's not over, is it? Lin Guo squatted forward and reached out to pick up a muddy branch. The clay figurine also has a third earthy temperament, and Lin Guo secretly hates why he can't avoid these two goods. When he turns around, he lifts a branch and throws it indiscriminately. Girls still need to be taken care of, so the branches mainly target the green python. This type of physical attack is disorganized and not fatal, but the mud is dirty and disgusting, especially for those in love. The brand new animal skin skirt and smooth chest show how much the green python pays attention to its appearance, and of course, it refuses to let the mud fall on it. There was no way, and he couldn't transform and kill her in a flash. The green python could only jump and curse, hiding behind a tree. Lin Guo, you're crazy. Do you dare to take action? Wu Mei taught everyone how to make better meat and even spoke the words of the beast god. She just wanted to play with you. How could you have the heart to refuse her? Qingmeng, don't say it anymore. Wu Wu, it's my fault. I just want to be friends with Lin Guo. I've been separated from my family and I'm really lonely. She actually wants to find an ugly girl to accompany her, so that the green python can't be in heat with her anytime and anywhere. But things didn't go as planned. The situation was so bad that Wu Mei was also very frustrated. Sure enough, seeing the tears of his beloved, the green python immediately ignored bothering Lin Guo and rushed over a few steps to hold Wu Mei's small face, heartily coaxing her. Not caring about oneself is better. Lin Guo threw down the broken branches in his hand, picked up the child who could no longer walk, breathed a sigh of relief, didn't even glance at the two of them, and even covered the child's eyes, afraid that he would see any inappropriate scene for children. He lifted his foot and continued to swim down. Further down the forest is a gobi mudflat. Outside a few towering trees, there are some low shrubs, revealing pieces of weathered yellow rocks. The edges are washed out by the river all the year round. There has been no rain for a long time. The river water in the middle of the mudflat is clear and soothing like a silver chain, which runs through the vast land in front of us. It is simply beautiful with all kinds of wild flowers and fruits on the mudflat. Lin Guo, there's a little beast. Lin Guo, look. Lin Bao suddenly called out. The child saw a wide riverbank from afar in Lin Guo's arms, with many small animals drinking water. Excitedly, they lowered their voices and shouted in Lin Guo's ear. The line of sight here is much clearer than in the forest, making it easier to see small animals and harder to capture. Lin Guo is now unarmed, coupled with hunger and weakness, and even if there is a way, he cannot come out. He can only think of a solution from the river. Can't we find a puddle? How many screw pads should we touch first? She didn't know which section of the river had piranhas, and she didn't dare to go down easily. The original book only mentioned that section. She was punished by hanging from a tree, her lower legs slashed and soaked in the water, with a bloody hue. The piranhas ate the meat off both of her legs clean. The specific location was not specified, but she knew there was danger in the river and could only search through the bushes on the shore, hoping to find some wild birds and duck eggs. The child Lin Bao only reached the waist height of an adult, but he obediently followed Lin Guo around with a small stick, not knowing what to look for. Anyway, he was just learning from Lin Guo's appearance. The two of them were busy living when suddenly they heard the soft female voice echoing in the forest behind them. Lin Guo, actually the fish in the river are also very delicious. How about I teach you how to fish with branches or weave a fishing net with vines? I was just finding a bunch of berries in the forest, and upon hearing this, I wanted to roll my eyes again. Is this girl addicted to being a teacher and teaching herself? However, she was also kind-hearted. If she didn't ignore her, Lin Guo could only pull out a relatively gentle smile, pressing it against the pitiful red and swollen pig head face, which was really glaring. If you and Qing Python have nothing to do, you can try the method you said. I haven't eaten anything for almost 2 days, I can't wait anymore. As Lin Guo spoke, she was really impatient and stuffed a handful of berries into her mouth. The bright red juice flowed out from the corner of her mouth, paired with her big face covered in red envelopes. She looked at Wu Mei, who was full of eyes, and her throat rolled and almost vomited. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. First Hunting. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. First Hunting. Lin Guo not only cannot see his head, but also his body. On the dark belly that had gained a few swimming laps, there were sudden orange peel marks and purple-red scratches on the skin, with a large area of wounds covered in mud and sand. It was too messy. I can't bear to watch anymore. Wu Mei advised herself 100 times in her heart not to judge people by their appearance, and her throat rolled a few times, but she couldn't control her instinctive physiological reaction. In order not to make the relationship worse, she could only cover her mouth. Why don't you leave first? If possible, she and the green python will catch more fish and give some forest fruits, so she can always accept her flattery, right? Anyway, as long as it's around the trees and fruits, the green python doesn't have any intention of tampering with itself. As long as it's within this safe range, it's okay to find something to do. The green python didn't like to see Lin Guo either. He looked away at the mudflat beside the river with disgust, took Wu Mei's small hand and walked back, scornfully saying, "There's nothing to eat here, and it's not easy to catch flying beasts with little meat. Let's go get what you're talking about." Wu Mei hesitated for a moment, seeing that Lin Guo had no intention of persuading her to stay. She could only take a step down the slope and follow her briskly. Lin Guo saw that the two of them finally stopped paying attention to him, so he grabbed a few familiar white thatch roots from the muddy ground by the water, walked to the riverbank, washed the soil on them with river water, stuffed some into his mouth, chewed them first, and gave them to the child as a snack to eat first. Fresh white thatch roots are moist and sweet, and children fall in love with this food as soon as they take it in. Their bright big eyes admire the fruits, but they keep chewing and swallowing for a second. The way Lin Guo wolfed down food made his throat choke. The child is really starving. Gently touching the child's big head, Lin Guo carried him to the shade of a nearby tree, which was covered by bushes. Even the two light bulbs hidden in the forest couldn't see them. She comforted the child and said, "You just sit here and eat slowly, I'll find something else to eat, don't run around." Lin Bao seemed afraid that she would leave him, so he quickly threw down the white thatch root and rushed over to hug her thigh, expressing his desire to walk with her. Lin Guo knew he didn't feel secure, so he struggled to squat down and look straight into his eyes, saying, "I'm right around here, as far as your line of sight can see. If you don't go far, can you?" The child stared at Lin Guo with big eyes and tried hard. Seeing her unwavering and irrefutable gaze, he finally hesitated and softened his body, no longer struggling to pounce on her. Just standing in place, the white thatch stopped eating and stared at her body as she left, afraid that a wrong eye would make her disappear. Lin Guo felt sad in his heart. The child who should have been pampered and grown up this year, in an unknown world, could not achieve basic survival, food and clothing, and lived a life of today without tomorrow, let alone a sense of security. Everything was slowly given to him by himself, and Lin Guo had confidence in himself. Without any burden, Lin Guo was slightly relieved by a bit of food and finally accumulated some strength. He found some sharp stones by the river and quietly stood in an inconspicuous position under the shade of the trees, lurking. I don't know what Lin Guo is going to do, and even the child Lin Bao dare not make a sound. He has a mouthful of white thatch root in his mouth, and even if he swallows water, he dare not chew it, fearing that making a sound may harm Lin Guo's health. Bang! Gaga gaga! Suddenly, Lin Guo suddenly threw out a stone and hit the wing of a wild duck combing its feathers by the river. The wild duck immediately jumped and screamed. The surrounding area became chaotic for a while, and various small birds and animals were frightened and scattered for their lives. Some were even frightened and plunged into the river, causing the fish in the water to jump out of the water and fall back into the water with a loud crash. The scene was chaotic and chaotic. TSK, I almost made you run away. Lin Guo pounced with some dissatisfaction. I'm still regretting the lack of modern weapons, not to mention guns, bows, crossbows, and daggers. It's really difficult to be barehanded. The autumn duck is the fattest, and with a successful strike from Lin Guo, her massive body was surprisingly fast, grabbing the wild duck that had been fluttering in mid-air. With victory, she turned back to show her achievements to her younger brother. Don't be afraid, younger brother. I will take care of you in the future, shouted calmly from the face to the heart. The flesh on my sister's body is all the love of a young boy for her, and this love will definitely be rewarded by her. Lin Bao indeed cheered and rushed over to grab her animal skin skirt, jumping, and learning from Lin Guo, he shouted softly, Lin Guo is the best. Lin Guo is a warrior. After speaking, I was afraid that my voice would be too loud and cause unnecessary trouble. I even stuffed my small fist into my mouth and excitedly looked up, releasing a wave of worship in my eyes towards Lin Guo. This can be said to be the first time the two of them have personally hunted prey. In the past, when Lin Guo was not in trouble, he only followed the collection team to collect wild fruits and vegetables, and even dared not leave the main army, let alone catch wild ducks with his bare hands. Lin Bao felt that even the warriors in the hunting team couldn't do Lin Guo's trick. Especially now, there are only the two of them who can eat alone and not be afraid of being taken away by the tribe. Lin Bao saw Lin Guo holding his wings and lifting the duck in front of him, and opened his mouth to bite at his neck. Oh, it's raw and can't be eaten. The hair hasn't been pulled yet. Lin Guo was startled by the child's movements. Upon closer inspection, the child's greedy eyes were filled with red blood. It's okay, Lin Guo. I've eaten skin with fur before. Although it's a bit smelly, just spit out the fur. I'll eat the skin, you'll eat the meat. If the hunting team doesn't get any food for the barbecue tonight, our ducks and beasts won't be able to survive. We need to ensure that the hunting team is full first. The child is only 7 or 8 years old, but knows everything. For the sake of their true selves, they really have to endure hardships. Lin Guo was moved by the child countless times, trying to recall the details in the book and block out those affectionate applause, as if the female protagonist only brought some vitality to the tribe after coming to this world. Before the female protagonist arrived, Mushroom Hair drank blood and the weak prey, creating darkness. The female lead has just come through, which is also a period of exploration. She still struggles with food and clothing for a long time. So, before Wu Mei unleashed her divine power, she still had to endure in order to feed her younger brother. Competing with orcs for food. She doesn't want to confront people from a tribe. Without a shelter, surviving in the wild is not just a joke. Suddenly, a earthy yellow venomous snake emerged from the shadow of the shrub, with its target pointing straight at the lower legs of the forest fruit. Fortunately, the venomous snake was in the blind spot of the child's sight and did not cause any panic. Lin Guo's mood froze and he remained calm in the face of danger. He grabbed the duck's hand and threw it fiercely at the snake's head. The snake's head slammed onto the ground. Taking advantage of its illness and taking its life, Lin Guo lifted his big foot and kicked the snake's 7-inch mark with a fierce kick. Suddenly, his bones shattered and Lin Guo's painful cry rang out simultaneously. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Species Richness. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8 Species Richness. Lin Guo forgot that he didn't wear shoes. The feet that haven't walked for a long time are already fragile. Along the way from the tribe, the soles of the feet have already been worn out several times. At this moment, a fierce kick hit the stone, and the tingling, electric, and sour sensation rushed straight from the soles of the feet towards the heavenly spirit cover. What's wrong with Lin Guo? Woo, what's wrong with Lin Guo? The child was startled by Lin Guo's sudden movements and quickly turned back when he heard a voice behind him. A large snake lay on the ground, and Lin Guo stretched his leg straight towards it, with a painful expression on his face. He thought she had been bitten by the snake, and tears streamed down his face. I'm fine, let me slow down and hurt my foot just now. Lin Guo coaxed the child and breathed in pain. Crouch down and grab a stone at your feet, then smash off the snake's head. Use a stick to pull the triangular snake head far away and expose it to the sun, as the snake head is stiff and does not die. It can survive for a long time and can also harm people. Then, carrying a thick and long snake body in a wild duck with a leopard, they swam down to a slow-flowing small puddle. The waterlogged terrain is relatively low, and the surrounding view is wide, allowing you to see if there is any danger, making it very suitable for camping. Lin Guo took the child to the water's edge and carefully observed the clear river water flowing slowly in the puddle. At first glance, he could see that there were not many creatures like leeches at the bottom of the water. There are actually many large mud snails and carefree little black fish swimming around, with occasional flashes of silver light caused by the reflection of sunlight from the scales of the willow fish. They swim rapidly in the water and are not small in size. This place is really good, Lin Guo sighed. She spent almost her entire life doing tasks, even tracking enemy situations in the deep mountains and forests, and seeing various rivers polluted by toxic water. It's been a while since I last saw this clear river water, which makes people feel happy at a glance. She arranged for the little one to play by the river. Seeing that he didn't want to wash off the mud on his body, she could only point to the mud snail in the water and say, "Little one, have you seen that mud snail? You can touch some and put it in this leaf for me." As she spoke, she grabbed a thick leaf from the only big tree beside her and handed it to the child to work on. Sure enough, as soon as Lin Bao saw the great responsibility bestowed upon him by the heavens, he didn't hesitate anymore. He thought he could paint the mud later and happily took the leaves into the water to touch the screws. If there are loaches, you can also throw them over if you touch them. Lin Guo looked at the child with a smile on her face, and her voice was light and pleasant. As long as she didn't look at her face, she was also a cool and sunny beauty. Taking advantage of the sun, Lin Guo also washed herself in the water for a while, letting the wet animal skin surround her body and air dry naturally. She was chewing a willow stick in her mouth and calling out to herself, "My phone. Hey, I'm here." Xiaomei's customer service is indeed there, and the voice is very pleasant. Start live streaming. Okay host, we will start the live broadcast for you. Do you need to turn on beauty? Did the system customer service find themselves ugly? Lin Guo lowered his head and glanced at his plump body, covered in dense red packets bitten by mosquitoes. Since he had not scratched them before, they had calmed down a lot, but only a little red. It didn't look good, but it was much better than during this morning's live broadcast. At least it was much cleaner. If you want to broadcast it, broadcast your most authentic self. Lin Guo didn't care and said, "Don't open up beauty." Xiaomei. A good host. I don't know what the use of opening a live broadcast is, but Lin Guo didn't care about it and instead found a wooden stick to drill into the wood and start a fire. The sun was scorching at noon, and there were many easily catching fire thatch flowers around. In just a moment, the sharp point where the wooden stick was ground by the rocks and rocks turned a piece of wood into black smoke. Grasping a tuft of fluffy thatch flowers and gently blowing them towards the black smoke, sparks slowly turned into flames, and the thatch flowers quickly burned. Placed in a pile of thatched flowers on the ground, coupled with thin dry branches, the flames grew larger and the fire quickly rose. Lin Guo's skin felt a bit painful from rubbing the wooden stick at high speed, causing her face to twitch a few times. In addition, the sun was too scorching, and sweat dripped down her cheeks, shaking off a string. At this moment, on the barrage of the live broadcast that she didn't pay attention to, she was originally saying that she was just looking clean, but her wet hair was sticking to her scalp, making her head appear bigger and so on, which were interrupted by a sudden rain of coins. Congratulations to the host for receiving their first reward, 999 Interstellar coins. Xiaomei's voice was filled with surprise. She doesn't understand, does someone even reward such an ugly anchor? Is interstellar aesthetics changing too quickly? She can't keep up with the times. This reward comes with a special sound effect, which is the sound of coins entering the pocket. Lin Guo only then noticed that in the live broadcast room, a colorful reward banner was hanging high at the top of the barrage. Below are those familiar names, with bullet comments such as shouting big shots and hugging thighs passing by. Lin Guo has never eaten pork and has seen pigs run. He wore a sincere smile on his face and said, "Thank you for your reward, Big Brother." Yes, the person who gives the reward is called Big Brother, simple and unadorned, both low.key and high.profile. Your method of making a fire is very good. The eldest brother who contributed the first prize in the live broadcast room spoke concisely. Qiao Yang said, "I'm curious about following this anchor. Although I usually play and it's not very popular, I'm not even jealous of her being rewarded for the first time." Kicking the cripple's good leg fiercely, he said, "I was attracted by the reward, indicating that the scenery in this place is quite beautiful. I don't know which wild planet it is, and I really want to travel. But the anchor is a bit too scenic. I just exclaimed that Big Brother is truly Big Brother and has a great appetite. I want to go to the Plus Star Network account. Jiao Yang said, to be honest, I don't care about my face. I like the refreshing energy of this anchor. Because after thanking Lin Guo, she no longer cared about the live broadcast. Now that her stomach is ringing like a drum, she has no intention of watching anything else. Eating that little white thatch root before was at most moisturizing her throat. The conditions were too limited, so Lin Guo picked up some thick branches from around and put them on the fire. He then went to the riverside with shade to process the ingredients. The river was cool and the breeze was gentle, which immediately dissipated the feeling of heat on Lin, Pengzi, and Guo's head, making their bodies much more comfortable. A snake and a live wild duck bound by a grass rope, Lin Guo only glanced at it and grabbed a hard rock by the river to smash it. He found a sharp piece of rock and directly opened the duck's neck to release blood. Because there was no suitable vessel to cook these duck blood, Lin Guo decided to drop the blood into the river and let it feed back to nature. When the wild duck stopped struggling and gasped for breath, she picked up a knife and opened its stomach, then she took out its organs and set them aside. Acting swiftly like an old master in a poultry factory. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Live Shop. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9 Live Shop. Lin Guo was busy with his hands, feeling that there was no seasoning in the game couldn't be delicious anymore. He remembered discovering some blooming garlic in the bushes just now, so he got up and went back to look for it. Looking around, there were white thatch roots everywhere, white thatch flowers swayed with the wind, and went straight through a grass in the direction of the small root garlic in memory, startling numerous flying insects, as well as butterflies that were almost the same as the dead tree leaves. They were frightened and flew into her face. Suddenly, her thigh was injured by a cluster of branches, causing her to take a breath and avoid the pain. Looking down, not surprised but happy. Surprisingly, it's a small plant full of thorns and dark green fruits, mountain pepper. Drip, host, discovered Sichuan pepper, which can be used as medicine and consumed. May I ask if it has been listed in the live streaming store? Xiaomei's prompt sounded in time, making Lin Guo excited, and his hand picking Sichuan peppercorns gave him a scolding. Is there a live streaming shop? Xiaomei also saw that Lin Guo received a reward and was expected to hire herself as a long-term human customer service representative. That's why she read the system prompts to Lin Guo. Otherwise, if the host didn't ask, she would be too lazy to use them as instructions. Yes, host. Everything you get in this world can be listed on the live streaming store. Of course, someone needs to buy it, and even the coins earned from tipping can be used to purchase products from other hosts. Can I buy something? Upon hearing this good news, Lin Guo finally became interested in this so-called live streaming system, which can improve his life. Who wants to live like a wild man? Let me see what other people's stores have first. Lin Guo kept collecting the necessary materials, but in his mind, he quickly browsed through the products of other people's live streaming stores. Her total wealth is only 999 coins from her elder brother, so she can only see products worth less than 999. These products are advertised or have high search volume, all of which are mechanical parts or various flavors of nutritional supplements. The best-selling and lowest-priced one is a 100-star salty health supplement. The following comments are full of indescribable bad taste. Drinking one drink can take 3 days, but you have to drink it. If you don't drink it for a long time, you won't be able to drive the mechanical armor anymore. This is a microcosm of the real interstellar world. Looking at the various high-tech items in the product list, the battle cells in the blood of Lin Guo are shouting. She likes technology and the feeling of driving firearms to kill without leaving a name, rather than the wild survival world that relies solely on muscles now. But just take a look, the hunger in her stomach forced her to face reality. No matter how good the interstellar world is, it doesn't belong to her. I searched for the most needed ingredients and clothes at the moment, and the clothes are in a dark and unaffordable state. The cheapest, least functional, ugliest, and bulky Starry Sky clothes are all exorbitant prices that she cannot afford, $99.99. There are only various kinds of food materials that she can't understand. They contain deep sea essence, blue ****, animal blood essence. Packed in various jars one by one, all marked with nutritional raw materials. Toxicity clearance is %80% 95, and the higher the percentage, the more expensive it is. Are you all eating toxic food? Lin Guo was shocked. Even if she wasn't a foodie and drank those strange and toxic liquids every day, she couldn't imagine whether she would die of craving. Anyway, she suddenly didn't dare to despise the world in her book now. Everyone has their own strengths, hobbies cannot be used as food, machinery and so on. It's really not good. Just compare and contrast with the child Lin Leopard. Playing cold weapons can also save lives, isn't it? In a moment of wild thought, Lin Guo had already put the mountain pepper on the shelf and probably no one bought it. She didn't take it seriously either, so she dug up some small garlic roots and walked back to the edge of the puddle. At this point, Lin Leopard had already touched many mud snails. The large mud snails had not encountered predators for a long time, and each one was almost the size of a child's fist, with a delightful size. The child was guarding a pile of mud snails, watching the killed wild duck with a nervous expression as he looked around, afraid of being snatched away. It wasn't until I saw Lin Guo walking back that I stumbled over to help pick up something. Lin Guo, what are you doing with grass? When can we eat meat? Lin Bao covered her stomach and kept swallowing. Lin Guo was also extremely hungry, so he threw the collected ingredients to the river and cleaned them thoroughly. He instructed the child to say, "You put the mud snails and their leaves together in the water by the river, surround them with stones to prevent them from running away, let them spit out sand, and then go there to catch some white thatch roots and come back to eat them as snacks at night. When you're tired, rest and wait for me to do it." It's not about enslaving a child, but not letting him do something. He stands there at a loss, like an abandoned puppy, and instead arranges for him to do something small. He is excited as if he has been used, and his whole body is full of energy. Okay. Sure enough, after receiving instructions, the child didn't run far and just followed the instructions nearby, making Lin Guo feel at ease. On the end of Lin Guo, he smashed a small handful of mountain pepper with stones, and also dealt with the big garlic. He also picked and smashed a handful of perilla leaves everywhere by the river. Finally, I took out a salty nutrient that I had just purchased and stored in the system warehouse, worth 100 star coins. On a large leaf, the same 3 types of paste were mixed together to form a sauce, which was evenly spread into the open belly of the wild duck. Because the wild duck was not plucked, it was unable to apply seasoning on the outside. Lin Guo kept half of the seasoning for later use, and then took a sip of the remaining salty flavor into his stomach. After smacking his mouth a few times, he expressionlessly threw the empty bottle back into the system warehouse. Watching Lin Guo start throwing and beating wild ducks, the barrage of bullets that had been silent for a long time in her live broadcast suddenly lit up. Jiao Yang said, "Let's not talk about the anchor's corpse abuse. Is that salty agent the same as the salty agent we know? The cheapest, slightly astringent nutrient that tastes like tears. How come the anchor has a natural expression like drinking water? Justice and freedom in people's hearts. Cruelty to the corpse. Report it, everyone cannot tolerate this kind of sensationalist anchor. Resolutely report it, and give everyone a clean live streaming platform. Ulan. Report the dog rolling rough, which affects my ability to see mis-cooked delicious food. I'll bite you to death. Jiao Yang. That's right, if you want to report it, you can secretly report it. You're not the only one who has to jump out and be disgusting. Anchor, can you kick someone? Let's kick this person out. Justice only exists in people's hearts. It's you people who are causing the live streaming platform to become more and more chaotic, with fewer and fewer people watching it. They are all worms who help the tyrant to wreak havoc. Who are you cursing? You are the worm. Lin Guo was busy with her work. As she threw the empty bottle into the warehouse, she glanced at the barrage and saw everyone arguing for her. She flipped through all the barrage records and realized that there was a misunderstanding. She, who was always able to take action and didn't force her, struggled to explain in order to protect the audience who spoke for her. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Continuously Provoking. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10 Continuously Provoking. I am in the wild orc world, and I don't know why this live streaming system is bound to me. The living conditions here are poor, and I can only hunt these non-toxic foods to satisfy my hunger. As she spoke, she picked up the snake's body and began to fall and fight, her hands constantly on her hands, and her heart continued to explain. For example, although both of these animals in my hand can be eaten, the wild meat is particularly hard, and without a fight, my cubs and I can't even bite it, and the taste is not good. Jiao Yang. Thank you to the anchor for popularizing science. I have learned, but I just hope that after the anchor is good at it, he can start the taste-sharing mode and let us also try it. Chio ball plus star net number. Don't pay attention to those troublemakers, they just can't stand others. Look at me, I really like the broadcaster's delicious food. Lin Guo looked at the barrage and the atmosphere improved. He even received a 100-star coin reward from Jiao Yang, and the money he had just spent on buying nutritional supplements was earned back. As soon as Lin Guo was happy, his explanation became even more heartfelt. She pointed to the mushy leaves and said, nutrients increase the saltiness of food, and these are the most common basic ingredients in the wild. Just like this small root garlic, which can be dug out as soon as it sprouts in spring, chopped and fried with eggs, or cold mixed, are all good dishes for rice. It feels like the anchor is working hard to teach us how to survive in the wild, but we can't eat the ingredients here casually. The barrage lit up a few more questions. I couldn't help but swallow my saliva. I'm in the capital city, and restaurants with this vintage food are all for the lower class. After eating it, toxins will remain in my body and affect my physical fitness. Unless I really don't have money, no one will eat this impure food. Lin Guo watched the barrage of bullets and licked his tongue. I didn't expect the interstellar space to be so miserable. Food is poisonous, and one cannot eat delicious food. What pleasure is there in living just by drinking nutrients? The mind is rich in spiritual world, and the hands move quickly. The beaten wild duck is directly wrapped in a layer of yellow mud and thrown into the fire for barbecue. And because the snake didn't have a pot, and in order to save ingredients as much as possible, it cut the snake's skin together, cut it into pieces, put a stick on it and grill it on the fire. From time to time, it flipped over to evenly heat the snake meat without burning it. The snake's body is not thick and quickly cooked. In front of Lin Bao, a child, and many viewers in the live broadcast room, Lin Guo took down 2 thinner skewers of snake meat from the fire, peeled off the black snake skin baked on the outside, and revealed the pink and tender snake meat inside. This venomous snake has good meat quality, looks tighter than chicken, and emits a pure meat aroma as soon as the skin is peeled off. Lin Guo is nimble, holding snake skewers in his left hand and suyi dipped in soy sauce evenly on the snake meat in his right hand. He then grilled the tender and pink snake meat over a pile of charcoal fire, adding a tempting burnt aroma. The first string, my younger brother will eat it first. Lin Guo placed the meat skewer in the hands of Lin Bao, who was so anxious that he pouted his butt and reached out to smell it. Prepare the second string as usual, and after seeing a few people, create a barrage of impressive screen scrolls. Lin Guo smiled at the corners of his mouth and mischievously said, take the second bite, fans first. After finishing speaking, she bit off a piece of snake meat with the little forest leopard who had been waiting for her to eat meat. Snake meat is really delicious. QQ bouncing brings a hint of the fragrance of suyi and a hint of pepper sesame. The faint salty and onion aroma fills the gaps between the lips and teeth. Taste sharing. Taste sharing. Anchor, you haven't turned on taste sharing. Sucking it looks so fragrant, let me taste it, ball, ah ah. The barrage was crazy, and Lingua didn't expect that a simple roasted meat would be so delicious, with a rare and authentic flavor. In the past life, people who wanted to eat wild animals usually started a few years ago, but couldn't even think about it. Most of them were raised for feed. Pu Tong, suddenly, a heavy object fell into the nearby river water, splashing huge splashes of water, making the newly opened taste-sharing forest fruit unable to avoid being drenched in the icy river water all over its head and face. Who am I, Chow? Just as I tasted some flavor, he poured me a head of water, which startled me. The barrage exploded. Me too. Just as I was about to savor it, I tasted the cold river water, which was quite sweet. It was a good river, and I was also startled. This man has a dog-like appearance, why is he so bad? The live broadcast audience all reacted in this way, and the protagonist Lingua's forehead veins jumped. Looking back, I saw the two bullies of the green python with a proud expression on their face. They walked towards them with Wu Mei, who had changed into a leaf outfit and had an apologetic expression on her face. The big stone in my hand was weighing and was about to be thrown over. Everyone, including those watching live broadcasts, instinctively shrank their necks in fear. Obviously, Lingua's reaction made the green python happy. He grinned heartily and hugged Wu Mei's shoulder with his left hand. He strode over and, while walking, held onto a stone and said with a smile, "Aren't you quite reckless? Why are you still afraid to hide?" As he looked at the meat in their hands, his face changed and his voice became low. "Are you eating snake meat?" Lingua finally remembered that the green python was the strongest warrior in the tribe. Because its body was a snake, it was domineering and prohibited everyone from eating snake meat, so no one dared to eat it. However, the Xiongren tribe did not hesitate to eat bear meat, it was purely a psychological reaction. Having eaten all the food, Lingua couldn't possibly spit it out. The rare delicacy was so delicious that Lingua ate the entire snake meat in front of him. Feeling provoked, the green python became angry and embarrassed. He raised his hand and threw the stone at Lingua, gritting his teeth to teach her a lesson. Lingua has never suffered such injustice since he joined the army. He was provoked twice and became angry. He flipped over and dodged the flying stones. When he stood up, he grabbed a handful of stones on the ground with his palm. After getting up, he quickly and fiercely threw his right hand at the head of the green python. Whoosh! Whoosh! The stone is not big, but it is aimed at the head. The green python dare not forcefully take it, so it has to tilt its head to avoid it. One can't avoid the second one, and the stones one after another seem to have a prediction. Wherever the green python hides, the stones hit like they hit, it's like hitting wherever it goes. Ouch! Ouch! You're done with Lingua, ouch! A dozen or so stones hit his skull in a row and made a thumping sound. Those who listened felt pain for him, except for the first one. The other stones thrown by Lingua could be said to hit all kinds of targets, causing the green python to flee with its head held fast. Oh! Lingua, you want to die. The face of the blue python, which had been smashed upside down, couldn't hang up and transformed into a big black python, with thick scales no longer afraid of small stones. What is the face of his first warrior when being slapped in front of his beloved female like this? She knelt down and begged for mercy if she didn't fight today, and he didn't even call him Green Python. End of this chapter.